Hello guys. Tonight we begin with something deceptively dull. A plain rice cake with no filling, no sugar, no apparent purpose except to be shaped by a stranger's breath during harvest rites. But if you think a rice cake is just a boring snack, try to picture this. A ritual deep in a misty field where someone stands in the rising steam of boiled water, murmuring into warm, sticky dough, not cooking, not praying, just breathing, shaping starch with exhaled air and a belief older than memory. You probably won't survive the boredom of this story unless you're willing to let go of logic, because this is history told slowly, ridiculously, and vaguely. This is the story of rice cakes, the kind shaped not by chefs, but by people dreaming sideways through time. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from some distant corner of the world, leave a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing how many of us drift off together, all over the planet. Now turn off your lights, maybe turn on a fan for a little white noise, and let's step into tonight's journey. You're standing in a kitchen that doesn't belong to you. It isn't modern. There are no shiny countertops or beeping timers. Just a clay stove, a pot of boiling water, and a smell in the air that clings like smoke soaked in time. You breathe it in moist hay, damp wood, something ancient that tastes like it came from the back of someone's throat 3,000 years ago. In front of you is a lump of glutinous rice dough, pale and shapeless, resting on a cloth. There is nothing special about it. But then a stranger steps forward. They exhale softly onto the dough. Once, maybe twice. It could be a prayer. It could be a lullaby. You don't ask. You don't speak. This is a ritual, and everyone in the room holds their breath while they do it. Tonight's question is simple. Do rice cakes know they're part of something larger? Don't answer too quickly. That question isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to be wondered about. As your eyes get heavier, following the rhythm of centuries, what you're about to hear is true. All the historical events in this story are factual. We're just telling them in a softer, sleepier, slightly more ridiculous way. You feel yourself drifting backward from that smoky kitchen. But not just in space, in time. You're sinking through years, through centuries, back into the shadowy fog of prehistory. In the Neolithic era, yes, the Stone Age, when people still cut things with rocks, there's evidence of a strange little ritual. Not a hunt, not a cave painting, but bowls, bite marks, and teeth impressions. Yes. Some archaeologists believe the earliest rice cakes weren't steamed or cooked. They were chewed. People would gather, they'd take raw glutinous rice, and they'd chew. Long, slow chewing until the starch turned into a soft, gluey paste. Then they'd spit it out. Not out of disgust, but on purpose, because back then, breath was sacred, and saliva was considered transformative. Enzymes in saliva do break down starch, sure, but spiritually? Who knows? Maybe they thought chewing was a way to feed the earth directly. Maybe they thought breath was the missing ingredient to awaken the rice. Or maybe, just maybe, they were very, very hungry, and figured spit was faster than fire. Historians still debate whether this was a ritual or just poor people getting creative. You don't need to pick a side. Just imagine it. Someone, maybe you, in another life, sitting in the early mist of morning, slowly chewing rice in silence, then shaping it gently on a flat stone, exhaling softly over it, waiting for the sun to rise. And so the very first rice cakes weren't made with hands. They were made with mouths, with breath, with the odd belief that something warm and sticky might please an invisible god watching from the tree line. It's ridiculous, isn't it? But maybe not as ridiculous as you think. That rice cake you eat every New Year's, the one your grandmother hands you with an almost ceremonial look, it might still carry a fragment of that ancient tradition. No more saliva, thankfully, but the dough is still soaked, kneaded, pressed, sometimes even whispered to before being steamed. Not to bless it, but to remember that breath tiny and unremarkable might still shape something that outlives us. You exhale. You hear the gentle simmer of boiling water, and you begin to understand why this story can't be rushed. This isn't history you memorize. This is history you fall asleep inside. A history you dream, half-formed, like the steam curling from the mouth of someone long dead, but still shaping what you eat. This is the story of the first rice cake chewed, breathed on, and eventually forgotten until a stranger retold it to you. Very slowly, very softly. You're still drifting backward, sideways, downward, until the dirt under your feet turns firmer, more organised, more dynastic. The air is heavier now. The sky is smeared with the copper hues of autumn. And somewhere beyond the yellowed fields, you hear the sound of bronze bells echoing from a temple. Not to keep time, but to remind time that it's being watched. Welcome to the Ming Dynasty. You've arrived at a festival. Not the loud, colourful kind with fireworks and lion dances, no. This one is quieter, earthier, held in a clearing between rows of millet and early rice. There are elders in robes with scrolls they can't read, and a boy holding a pot of something sticky with both reverence and clear confusion. It's rice. Glutinous, pounded, sculpted. But don't get too comfortable. You're not here to eat it. You're here to witness it, just like the ancestors supposedly are. This is a rite. They don't call it that, of course. They call it presenting the breath to the field spirits, which sounds poetic until you see what it actually involves. A group of solemn-faced villagers gathering around a thick, glutinous lump of rice, taking turns breathing over it, before pressing their thumbs into its sides, as if shaping the memory of something they can't fully remember. There is no incense, no music, just steam, breath, and starch. The official story is that this offering will please the ancestors and ensure a good harvest. But when you look at their faces, it feels more like something else, less reverent, more habitual. Like brushing your teeth because your grandmother still watches from the ancestral tablet. Some historians suggest that these rice cakes were never meant to be eaten at all, that they were sculpted and left out to rot intentionally as a symbol of generosity to the spirit world. Others argue they were consumed after the ritual, but only by the elders, and only after a recitation of spiritual digestion. Yes, that's a real phrase from a real bamboo slip. Of course, some academics believe this entire thing was invented, later retroactively imagined into the Shang record to romanticize farming rites. But what's history if not the world's oldest fan fiction? And still, they breathe. Every participant in this rite exhales on the rice before it's placed on a carved stone altar, not speaking, just breathing. Like each breath carries a wish too fragile to say out loud. You lean closer. The dough is soft, warm, faintly fragrant in a way that doesn't quite smell like food. A girl whispers something into it, then quickly backs away like she's afraid her words might actually take root. Her brother follows, but instead of a whisper, he chuckles and blows a raspberry. No one scolds him. Some even laugh. It turns out even sacred cakes aren't safe from siblings. Later, as the ritual closes, the cake is lifted, very carefully, by the eldest man in the village. He places it into a lidded jar and seals it with red string. No one touches it again. No one speaks of it. The jar is hidden somewhere under the family altar, and 6 months later it will be replaced by another, unopened, uneaten and slightly mouldy. Because you see, the mould is part of the process. It proves the cake was alive, that it changed. That time, breath and starch danced together long enough to attract something fungal, something sacred, something gross. Later dynasties will fight about whether that mould was symbolic or literal. Some will claim the mould represented the acceptance of decay, others that it was just a way to test who had the worst kitchen ventilation. But here's the weirdest part. In one recently unearthed tomb, archaeologists found a clay model of a rice cake complete with tiny thumbprints, breath lines, and a faint inscription. Made for grandmother, with all my breath. Historians are still debating whether that inscription meant emotional sincerity or literal exhalation. Meanwhile, someone on the excavation team ate a bit of the preserved cake. He was fine. Probably. And you drifting in this misty scene start to feel that odd sense again. That breath, this small invisible act, is not so small after all. You've heard people say breath is life. But here, breath is history. It's memory. It's participation in a ritual no one fully understands but keeps doing anyway. It's like rice. Technically simple, functionally complicated, spiritually sticky. Your feet are cold. Your eyes are heavier. But your thoughts linger around that strange little truth that once a lump of rice was made sacred not by fire, not by gods, not by ingredients, but by the air someone breathed onto it. Maybe that's why we steam rice in covered pots, to trap the breath inside. You exhale, the sky shifts, the bells fade, and somewhere in the folds of your blanket you can almost smell the warmth of rice that no one ever meant to eat. The smoke from the Shang rituals hasn't cleared when the scenery begins to reshape. You feel it before you see it, an unease in the wind, a stillness in the soil, as if the ancestors are pausing for a breath they're not sure they should take. You've landed in the Zhou dynasty now. The fields are more orderly, the robes stiffer, the rules even more ridiculous. Society has settled into something that calls itself stable, and with stability comes the need for symbols, preferably ones that don't talk back. Enter the rice cake. You're standing at the edge of an autumn festival again. Different century, same obsession with cycles, harvests and offerings. The rice is piled in pyramids, the incense is everywhere, and someone's playing a zither like it owes them money. But your eyes are on the table in the centre. 12 small rice cakes, perfectly round, slightly glossy, each with a delicate dent in the centre. Not from a thumb, not from a tool, from breath. Yes, the artisans, if you can call them that, stand in a half circle holding the soft dough in their palms. Each one leans forward, each one exhales, then presses the air into the centre of the cake using their lips, ever so gently, like kissing a snowflake or whispering a secret to the moon. The result? A shallow depression shaped by exhalation. They call it the spirit hollow. You blink. Someone nearby mutters, "A cake without breath is just a lump." You believe them. These breath-formed cakes are part of a ceremony called moon kneeling, held during the mid-autumn rites. Families gather under a swollen, gossiping moon. They don't sing, they murmur, they don't light candles. They burn dried mugwort to chase away invisible things that might steal the dough's spiritual shape. The cakes are made at night, under full moonlight, because the moon apparently is watching. If she sees you cheating, say, shaping a cake with a spoon, she'll curse your harvest, or your teeth, or your second-born child. The scrolls are vague. A few historians suggest this is metaphor. Others say no, it was taken quite literally. Villagers did believe the moon had a temper and a special hatred for lazy bakers. Somewhere in the middle of all this, you watch a girl barely take a cake in her hands, raise it toward the sky, and whisper something into its surface. It's not a wish, it's an apology. For what? No one knows. But she breathes onto the cake, leaves her mark in the centre, and places it carefully in the steaming basket as if it might explode. You wonder how many tiny regrets are trapped in rice cakes across centuries. The official reason for these ceremonies is simple: to thank the spirits for the harvest and to ensure fertility for the next season. But here's where things get murky. A record from the Bronze Bamboo Collection. Yes, that's a real historical text. Mentions a disagreement between two court ritualists over the exact distance a mouth should be from the rice when exhaling. One said 1 kun, about an inch. The other argued for 2. They both agreed anything more than 3 was spiritually ineffective and aesthetically indecent. That same year, one of them was mysteriously reassigned to a province known mainly for mosquito plagues. Coincidence? Probably. Entertaining. Definitely. What's more, there's a footnote in a surviving Joe scroll suggesting that only those who had harvested the rice could breathe on it. Outsiders' breath was considered unfamiliar, air impure, directionless, lacking ancestral approval. So yes, your breath could be socially unacceptable, which is hilarious, until you realise what it says about the way people viewed breath, not just as a biological function, but as an identity marker, a symbol of origin, lineage, permission. Your breath wasn't just yours, it belonged to your family, your field, your ghosts. Some researchers today think that breath shaping was simply a hygienic concern disguised as ritual. Others argue it was a way to democratize food making, since anyone could breathe, even children or the elderly. Still others claim it was symbolic of the ki, the life force, and that the rice cake was a temporary vessel, like a soft edible lantern. You can almost feel the debate happening somewhere, in a dim academic conference room, full of exhausted historians trying to prove the spiritual weight of dough. Meanwhile, back in the Zhou dynasty, the steam basket opens, and the smell is divine, not sugary or rich, just warm, deep, earthy, with a whiff of leaves and old promises. The cakes have set, their hollows remain. The breath is still there, you think, trapped in that slight dip, vibrating in some molecular way long after its owner forgot they ever stood under a moon like this. One of the elders lifts a cake, bows to it, not dramatically, but like you would to a very tired teacher. Then he eats it, just like that. No prayer, no flourish, just consumption. The others follow. Not all of them eat. Some hold the cakes in their hands as if waiting for a sign. One person pockets theirs, another quietly places it under a tree. Later that. Tree is struck by lightning, but that's another story. Back in your floating, half-dreaming mind, you try to piece it all together. So far you've seen rice cakes chewed and spat, breathed on and buried, kissed by moonlight, and debated by bureaucrats with measuring sticks. Every version insists on one thing. Rice isn't just rice. It's the body of something invisible. And breath isn't just breath. It's the spirit trying to explain itself. Is this real? Well, yes. These rites are recorded. The cakes existed. The mould, the thumbprints, the moon rituals, all of it. But whether it meant what they thought it meant? That's a harder question. And so, the debate continues. Even today, scholars argue whether the breath rituals were literal, metaphorical, or simply a case of people being weirdly attached to soft carbs. The only consensus: you don't argue with old rice, it has layers, and as you curl further into the dark, somewhere between steam and silence, a final thought drifts into your head. Maybe the point wasn't the cake at all. Maybe it was the moment before, the inhale, the pause, the hush of everyone watching someone breathe into starch as if they were exhaling the world itself. Maybe that's what we've been trying to remember all along. You're still caught in the haze of a moonlight and steam when the world tilts again. Not abruptly, no, that would wake you, but with the slow, creaky grace of a centuries-old door being opened by a wind that isn't entirely metaphorical. Now the Zhou formality dissolves, like starch in warm water. You've slipped forward in time into a moment where the line between the living and the dead has thinned to mist. The autumn air is sharp, golden and full of tension. The rituals have become theatrical, the cakes even more symbolic. You're standing in a grove at dusk. A cluster of villagers in faded robes are kneeling, not to a statue, not to a ruler, but to the sky itself. Or rather, to the glowing orb rising above the hills, the harvest moon. It's enormous, yellow as yolk, suspiciously large, like it's eavesdropping. Tonight is the moon harvest rite, and yes, you've seen this festival before, but this version, it's raw. It's older than the poems, older than paper, older than the mooncakes sold in shiny boxes today. This rite doesn't involve lanterns or parades, just rice cakes. And breath. Always breath. You're watching from the edges again. No one sees you, but if they did, They wouldn't care. You're not here to interfere. You're here to remember. At the centre of the grove, a woman in her 50s weathered hands, eyes like burnt tea lifts a bowl of uncooked glutinous rice. Slowly, deliberately, she pours it into a stone mortar. Around her, a ring of others begin chanting, not loudly, not musically, but rhythmically, like a heartbeat with a cold. As she pounds the rice with a heavy pestle, the chant quickens, not out of passion, out of timing. They must align the moment the dough forms with the precise peak of the moon's rise. No pressure. But here's the curious part. Once the rice has turned to paste, it's passed still steaming to 12 individuals. Each one takes a small lump and cups it in their hands. They do not shape it. They do not flavour it. They breathe on it, in unison. One deep inhale, one long exhale. 12 breaths released at once, slow and hot, like 12 souls sighing across centuries of repetition. Some say this breath gives the cake moon memory. Others argue it's nonsense and that breath simply makes the surface glisten. The debate, naturally, is unresolved, but local elders still insist the breath must be steady and clean, which led, famously, to a brief scandal in 436 BCE when one participant was caught chewing garlic beforehand. He was banned for 7 years. This isn't superstition exactly. This is performance. Reverence as choreography. After the breath comes the shaping. With pale fingers, each person presses their thumb into the centre of their cake. You've seen this before, but this time the cakes are not round. They're elliptical, meant to mirror the moon's phase, and yes, there are arguments about that too. Some ritual texts from this era insist the cakes must resemble a full moon, perfectly round, symmetrical, unmarred. Others demand the thumbprint be deep and off-centre, symbolising the shadow of human imperfection. One philosopher argued that the rice cake, like life, is only beautiful when it sags a little. He was considered scandalous, but also strangely popular among potters. Tonight's cakes are imperfect on purpose. Their indentations vary. Some are small, like a child's hesitant poke. Others are vast, like someone trying to dig the truth out of starch. The variety is intentional. It represents the diversity of wishes. Because here's the catch tonight. Each person exhales their wish into the dough. Not to be granted, to be forgotten. The moon harvest rite isn't about desire. It's about release. You breathe your longing into the cake. You steam it. You offer it to the moon. You never speak of it again. It's the opposite of a birthday candle. It's a burial. And you're watching one now. A young man, barefoot, anxious, trying not to cry, breathes onto his dough like it's the last warm thing he'll ever hold. He presses his thumb in, shakes slightly, then sets the cake into the steaming basket, where it vanishes behind the cloth. Steam curls upward, caught by the moonlight. For a moment it looks like the moon is inhaling it. There's no music, no applause, just a few crickets, the crackle of pine cones in the fire, the sound of something being remembered and forgotten at the same time. Later, the cakes will be retrieved and buried under an old tree, not eaten, not kept, just placed gently into the dirt like sleeping thoughts. A regional scroll from the period mentions that these burial sites were often revisited months later, dug up not for the cake, but for the plants that grew nearby. If the rice cake wish was strong, they believed the plants would blossom unnaturally early. This led to some confusion when a group of children planted extra cake near their favourite fig tree and inadvertently caused the village's first unofficial fertility shrine. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or just another example of people doing very weird things with food. Regardless, one thing is clear. In this moment, rice cakes are no longer food. They're vessels, temporary bodies for emotions too heavy to keep. And the breath is a seal, the thing that says, yes, I once felt this, and now I let it go. You're tired. You feel that same softness in your own breath, like you could lean forward into a lump of dough and leave something behind too. A regret, a secret, a person you once were, or hoped to be. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the rice cake shaped by a stranger's breath was never meant for the gods, or the moon, or even the ancestors. Maybe it was meant for the person who made it. A ritual to remind them that longing, once released, becomes something real, something warm, something that disappears into steam. You exhale. The moon doesn't answer, but she listens. She always listens. By now, you've learned not to trust time. It doesn't move straight. It curls, steams, loops back on itself like the breath from a rice cake basket left uncovered too long. You're still holding the ghost of that moon-soaked scene in your lungs when the air turns sour. Not rotten, just slightly off. Like something sacred that's sat out too long. Like tradition with mould at the edges. You're in the Han Dynasty now. The robes are cleaner, the characters more refined, the altar's bigger and frankly more insecure. There's a new obsession in town, structure, bureaucracy, harmony, enforced with a ruler and a firm cough. And yet, in the villages away from the Confucian scrolls and the painted courtyards, things still ferment. Sometimes, literally. This is where you meet the mouldy rice cake. It's not a metaphor, it's an actual cake. Slightly green, lightly fuzzy, and if the smell is anything to go by, profoundly cursed. Let me explain. You're crouched beside an old man who's squinting at a mound of spoiled rice dough. His name is irrelevant, but his purpose is not. He's the village's offering inspector, a completely made-up title given to anyone old enough to smell things and wise enough to look worried. He pokes the cake with a stick. He doesn't say anything. That's how you know it's serious. Around him, the villagers whisper. The cake was meant to be part of the White Autumn offering a rite, designed to thank the spirits for not ruining the crops. Instead, the cake has developed a troubling texture and a visible ecosystem. Half the village thinks this is a sign of divine favour. The other half thinks it's a sign someone left the offering table too close to the pigsty. Here's the twist. The cake was supposed to be breath-blessed the night before, but the person designated to do it, a teenage boy named G, forgot. Why? Because he was in love, or drunk, or both. In any case, he skipped the rite. The dough sat unbreathed overnight, and now it looks like an abandoned petri dish. You'd think this would just be a small scandal, like forgetting the words to the harvest song. But no, this is the Han Dynasty. They keep records. They write poetry about mildew. They elevate gossip into art. Within hours, the cake becomes a political issue. The village elder, a woman known only as Old Fox Auntie in the records, declares that the mould is a heavenly beard, a symbol that the spirits have tasted the dough and found it memorable. She argues that the absence of breath allowed the divine to breathe into it instead. G, hoping to avoid punishment, agrees enthusiastically, but another elder stiff, humorless, and perpetually damp disagrees. He insists the mould is a curse, a punishment for forgetting the ritual, and recommends a complete calendar realignment to purge the village of spiritual mildew. What follows is an argument so intense, so illogically passionate that it becomes a minor historical footnote. A bamboo scroll from the region describes it as the Great Mould Debate of 9th Moon, and claims the shouting was so loud, a passing ox fell into a ditch. Historians still debate whether the mould was symbolic or just mould. Some claim it was a metaphor for forgotten duty. Others believe mould was feared because it represented life outside of order growth without permission. A rebellion of the damp. But the village, in the end, does what most villages do. It splits the difference. They place the cake on the altar anyway, a mould and all. They rename it Spirit-Visited Rice. Then they sing twice as loud, pretend it never happened, and go on with their harvest feast. You'd think this would be the end of the story. A weird little episode of rural fermentation and soft panic. But no. Months later, a visiting court official hears the tale, writes about it in his travel journal, and sparks a tiny philosophical movement in Luoyang called the doctrine of rot. They argued that purity wasn't the absence of decay, but the acceptance of transformation. That breath, mould, and memory were all the same thing. Signs that something had been touched and changed. Naturally, the movement was banned within a year. Too poetic, too moist. Still, whispers of it remained. In kitchens, in fields, in grandmothers who sniffed their dough and said, "Not perfect, but full of spirit." So what did we learn? That breath matters. That forgetting matters too. That even when a ritual is skipped, and the dough spoils, and the calendar falls out of step, something still lingers. Something grows in the gaps. Something strange, and possibly divine, in the fuzzy silence left behind. You lean closer to the mouldy cake. The smell isn't pleasant, but it's not terrible either. It's honest. The villagers begin to chant again, louder this time, not because they believe, but because they want to believe, because they need to believe that a mistake can still be made sacred, that rot can still be part of the offering. You breathe out slowly, and for a second the mould on the cake seems to shimmer, not in magic, in moisture, in truth. And somewhere deep in your head, a quiet realization settles. Breath doesn't always prevent the strange. Sometimes it invites it. Sometimes it's the thing that tells the world, "I'm here. I touched this. Even if I ruined it, I was part of it." You exhale again. The air is still. The mould is still there. But so are you, watching, listening, dreaming. As the steam rises from somewhere nearby, and the history of starch unfolds one breath at a time, the air smells sharper now. You've left the muddy warmth of village rites and wandered into something colder, flatter, more suspicious of spontaneity. The mould is gone, bleached away, presumably replaced by polished tiles, red lacquer, and guards who look like they haven't laughed since birth. Welcome to the Ming Dynasty. Yes, the one with the terracotta army, the Great Wall, and a penchant for burning books. A dynasty so obsessed with control it made bureaucracy a kind of religion. You're in the capital now, walking through a corridor lined with scrolls that only 3 people are allowed to read. And in one of these scrolls, locked away behind 2 guards and a mostly decorative phoenix carving, is a curious decree. All breath-shaped rice objects are hereby banned from ritual practice. No context, no explanation. Just a flat, emotionless ban. Why? Let's find out. You're standing in a chamber near the palace kitchens, where a group of cooks in heavy robes are trying not to look anxious. One of them, an older man with a nervous twitch and hands that smell like sesame oil, pulls you aside, not because he can see you, but because he needs someone to listen. He tells you the story in whispers. Apparently there was once a provincial offering a simple harvest rite from a farming village in the south. A cake was made, a cake was breathed on. The breath, it was said, came from a child who had been fasting for 3 days, and whose wish was so pure it made the rice shine. The cake was brought to the local governor, who brought it to a court official, who presented it to the emperor himself. And the emperor, in a moment of uncharacteristic curiosity, tasted it. He chewed. He paused. Then he threw the entire plate at the wall and shouted, "This is witchcraft. That's how the ban started. Not because the cake tasted bad, it didn't, but because someone whispered, too loudly, that the cake had been shaped with breath. Human breath. The air from someone outside the court, possibly a child, possibly unrecorded, possibly a believer in something the emperor did not authorize. This was not just food. It was ideology. An ideology in the Qin court was more dangerous than poison. You see, the Qin court didn't trust things that couldn't be counted. You could measure grain, weigh silver, even catalogue ancestors. But breath was too slippery. It didn't follow rules. You couldn't standardize it, couldn't tax it, couldn't write it into law, and anything you couldn't control was automatically subversion. So No more breath-shaped rice cakes. From that day forward, all ritual foods had to be cut with uniform moulds, geometrically perfect, no thumbprints, no exhalations, just tools and silence and steam. The cakes were beautiful but hollow, glossy but blank, like statues without souls. And here's the eerie part. People complied, at least officially, but rumours say otherwise. In the southern provinces, especially the marshy stubborn ones, the breath ritual didn't die. It just went underground. Cakes were still made in secret shape by breath, buried under stones, eaten in twilight. In some villages, children were taught to hold their breath while shaping dough, just in case spies were listening. A handful of archaeologists in the modern day claim to have found breath-shaped cakes and tombs from this era. They point to irregularities in texture, faint mouth-shaped indentations, and traces of what might be human saliva, or maybe just damp storage. Naturally, other historians dismiss these claims. They argue that the cakes were damaged during burial, that the indentations were from mice, not mouths, that the idea of an emperor fearing a rice cake is absurd, and maybe it is. But so is banning breath. You're back in that kitchen chamber now, and the cook is showing you something. He lifts a cloth. Beneath it is a cake. Simple, pale, still warm, and shaped not with a mould but with breath. Just one. He exhales slowly, reverently, onto the cake, then presses his lips to the centre, leaving the faintest hollow. He looks around, frightened, but satisfied. He wraps the cake, hides it in his robe, and walks out into the dusk like he hasn't just committed a small edible heresy. You follow silently, thinking, what kind of world is this, where breath is illegal, where a sigh can be a protest, where shaping a cake with your own exhalation is an act of rebellion? Maybe not a loud rebellion, not one that topples empires, but a quiet one, the kind that refuses to forget, the kind that hides in kitchens, in old women's stories, in thumbprints and dough and memories that smell faintly of jasmine smoke. You inhale, you hold it, you let it out slowly, and in that breath you realise something chilling and tender all at once. The emperor could ban breath-shaped rice cakes, but he couldn't ban breathing. And so, the ritual lived on, not in palaces, in pockets, in cellars, in secret baskets steamed at midnight, shaped by strangers who whispered into rice like it was listening. You feel yourself drifting now, not away from the story, but deeper into it, like steam rising through cloth, like breath disappearing into starch, like history that was almost erased but wasn't. Not entirely. Not if someone somewhere still remembers to breathe. The last traces of the chin court dissolve like starch in hot water, leaving behind only steam and silence. You float through the quiet, drifting east and west at once, until your senses fill with the scent of spice and camel sweat. You're standing in the middle of something vast, not an empire, a road. No, the road, the Silk Road. Not a single road, really, but a messy tangle of paths, dust and desires that stretched across mountains, deserts, and the very edge of what most people considered the world. Here, rice meets almonds. Here, cumin whispers to tea. And yes, here, glutinous rice cakes learn to listen to curses muttered in 6 different languages. You've landed in a small trading post. It's loud. It smells like new leather, stale bread, and a little too much ambition. You're somewhere between the Taklamakan Desert and a place called Don't Ask Too Many Questions if you value your ankles. And right now, in the back of a dusty tavern behind a curtain that's pretending to be a wall, a rice cake is being shaped. Poorly. You watch a local merchant, a man with oil-stained sleeves and a moustache that could smuggle secrets, trying to impress a Persian trader by recreating his grandmother's ancient rice cake ritual. First, you must breathe onto the dough, he says, already out of breath. The Persian watches, unimpressed. And then what? He asks, raising one perfect eyebrow. The merchant fumbles. Then, the dough remembers you. Remembers what exactly? Your garlic breath? There's a pause, then laughter. Both men burst out laughing, and yet the breath is still given. The dough is still shaped, and later the rice cake is still steamed, served, and eaten. Badly, but eaten. Because even here, amid trade and translation and terrible singing, the idea of shaping rice with breath still floats through the air like something contagious. And maybe it is. See, along the Silk Road, ideas were as much cargo as silk and spices. Stories passed hands like coins. Beliefs melted together like butter in the Gobi sun. And rice cakes, well, they absorbed things. Almond paste from Persia, dried apricots from Samarkand, sometimes heartbreak. One story tells of a Mongol warlord who believed that if his rice cakes weren't blessed by at least 3 different breath types, young, old and foreign, his army would lose its next battle. Did it work? Number. He was defeated within a week, but the rice cake survived. It entered local cuisine, inherited a layer of crushed pistachio, and was renamed something no one could pronounce without 3 attempts and a mouthful of flour. Back in the trading post, you listen to a whispered argument between a Chinese envoy and a Central Asian cook. They don't need breath, the envoy insists. They just need shape, clean, uniform. The cook, who's older, greyer, and far more tired, shakes his head. No, he says. Without breath, the dough forgets. That sentence will haunt you. Because it's not just about rice cakes. It's about memory. About how things carry pieces of us, even when we don't mean them to. And breath. Breath is the part we can't write down. The ingredient that doesn't show up in recipes, but always shows up in taste, even when it doesn't make sense, even when no one agrees on what it does. Because historians, of course, argue about this too. Some claim the idea of breath-shaped cakes travelling the Silk Road is fantasy, that no evidence supports the notion of transcontinental carbohydrate spirituality. Others point to fragments of travel journals that mention cakes shaped by mouth and prayer, or soft white discs which bear the taste of the cook's soul. Are these metaphors? Maybe, but maybe not. One scholar, unfortunately named Professor Gloop, wrote an entire monograph on transcultural glutinous symbolism. His thesis: that rice cakes, far from being local superstitions, were actually part of a shared subconscious and edible myth, linking farmers and traders, peasants and poets, across borders they didn't know existed. Naturally, he was mocked, but only until someone found a centuries-old recipe buried in a merchant's ledger in Kashgar. It included instructions for steaming dough only after it has received the breath of at least one person who has seen the ocean. No explanation, no measurements, just that one requirement. And so, even here, even now, with camels chewing loudly behind you and incense making your eyes water, you feel something familiar. A hand cupping soft rice dough. A breath held, released. A moment shared between strangers who don't share a language, but understand that food is more than food. It's memory, it's longing, it's the quiet belief that your breath, yours might still mean something, even to someone who's never met you. You lean against a sun-warmed wall, listening to someone shape a rice cake with exaggerated care, trying to impress a diplomat, or a ghost, or both. The dough folds softly, the breath lands gently, and for a second, you're not in a trading post. You're in every kitchen that ever existed, in every quiet moment before the steam rises, in every whisper pressed into dough by someone who hoped it would matter. Even if no one remembered their name, even if their breath is all that's left, you exhale. Somewhere far away, someone else inhales, and the cake, halfway between memory and myth, is ready to be steamed. The sounds of trade and laughter fade behind you. The desert vanishes, and so does the spice. Now, everything smells sweet, too sweet. You're standing inside a room that gleams like it's been wiped with honey and regret. The walls are polished. The floors whisper when walked upon. There are silk screens, golden lanterns, and someone humming very quietly behind a curtain. Welcome to the Tang Dynasty, the golden age of poetry, of painting, of porcelain teacups balanced on lacquered trays. Also the golden age of court intrigue, hairpins that double as murder weapons, and concubines who understand diplomacy better than generals. You're in the women's quarters now. You shouldn't be, but history makes no rules for ghosts. And tonight the concubines are making rice cakes. It is not an official ritual. It is not sanctioned by anyone wearing a hat with tassels. It's just something they do once a year behind a screen of perfume smoke and whispered gossip. They call it the breath ceremony of the mirror moon, a name that sounds like a poem and probably was. There are 6 of them, all in silk, all young, though not all innocent. They sit in a circle on the floor, sleeves tucked, posture flawless. At the centre, a large bowl of glutinous rice dough, already steamed, already soft, warm enough to mould. But they don't mould it. Not yet. First, they talk. One tells a story about a noblewoman who breathed on her mirror every morning, believing it would trap her youth. Another swears she once saw a eunuch breathe onto a peach, and it rotted in his hand. A third, quieter than the rest, says nothing at all. She just stares at the dough like it owes her something. Then comes the ritual. Each woman leans forward and breathes slowly onto the rice dough. Not a quick puff, not a sigh. A long, deliberate exhale. The kind that carries memory, desire, revenge. They believe, because someone's grandmother told someone's maid who told someone else at a bathhouse, that their breath can trap a feeling inside the dough. That if they exhale while thinking of a person, that person will dream of them, or miss them, or choke on a grape. The details are unclear. You might laugh, but you wouldn't dare, because in this room, the ritual is serious. The laughter has stopped. The air is thick, and every breath lands like a spell. After breathing, they shape the dough into cakes oval, delicate, each one pressed lightly with a fingertip, then with the back of a lacquered nail. They do not steam them. They do not eat them. They wrap them in silk and hide them under pillows. Some are sent with messengers. Some are left on balconies to catch the moonlight. One, you notice, is placed on the edge of a mirror. You don't ask why. You already know the answer isn't in words. Now, here's the curious part. These women are educated. Many can write poems better than the men they serve. Some know astronomy. Some know martial arts. One, rumoured to be the daughter of a disgraced general, once rewrote an entire state dispatch and no one noticed. They're not superstitious fools, they're players. And the breath-formed rice cakes, they're tools, messages and dough, encoded size, and they're not alone. An account from a Tang eunuch whose diary somehow survived centuries of censorship mentions this practice in a footnote. He writes, "On the night of the third harvest moon, the women shape ghost cakes. I do not touch them. They are for lovers, or curses, or dreams." Historians argue over what ghost cakes means. Some say it refers to spirit offerings, traditional treats for ancestors. Others believe it was a nickname for these breath-shaped confections made in secret by women who had no other way to speak their minds. Still others, more sceptical, call it poetic nonsense, invented by a eunuch with too much ink and not enough friends. But here's something harder to dismiss. In one sealed box recovered from a Tang noblewoman's tomb, archaeologists found a rice cake, perfectly preserved, pressed with a thumbprint, and on its surface still visible were tiny gold flecks. Analysis revealed them to be from powdered cosmetics only used in the inner court. What does it mean? No one agrees, but the cake was real, and it was hidden, not offered, which means it wasn't for gods. It was for memory, for the self, for the breath that once made it more than food. And you, sitting here in this silken room between sighs and shadows, realize something no textbook ever quite captures. These weren't just cakes. They were containment spells. They were ways for women who weren't allowed to write treaties or climb walls or start wars to leave behind something that could still move, still soften, still haunt. You look at the girl who said nothing. She's holding her rice cake like a secret. She breathes on it once more, then wraps it tight and hides it in her sleeve. Maybe it's meant for someone, maybe not. Maybe it's meant for herself, to open one day when she forgets who she used to be. And maybe, just maybe, that breath will remind her. You exhale quietly, and in the hush of the chamber, with the smell of jasmine and steamed rice lingering around you, you realise, even in the most polished palaces, even behind the thickest walls, the breath still finds a way. It's soft, it's warm, it's inconvenient, it refuses to be forgotten. Like a rice cake pressed by someone who had no right to want anything, and yet wanted anyway. The curtains of the Tang court dissolve into smoke, and you fall gracefully, dreamlike, into the cracks between centuries. The ground beneath you is wet, mossy, and uneven. The air is no longer perfumed. It is thick, heavy, and full of superstition. You've landed in a village. Not just any village, but that village the one whispered about in court records with a little too much caution and a little too little detail. It's the plague year, not a plague year, the one. The year when everything went wrong and no one agreed on why. You don't know the exact date. No one does. The imperial calendars were accidentally destroyed, which is always a good sign. But what you do know is this: the village is sick. People are afraid. And some genius has decided it must be the rice cake's fault, specifically the breath-shaped ones. It starts with a fever. A boy, no older than 7, sweats through the night, then wakes up screaming that his rice cake whispered to him. And not a good whisper, not a hey you'll be fine whisper, a demonic, wet, inside-out sort of whisper. Naturally, the village panics. The elder calls an emergency council, which in village terms means 7 people in a shed, eating dried turnips and arguing about ghosts. The options on the table are burn the rice cakes, eat the rice cakes before they eat you, or worst of all, stop breathing on them, a radical idea. And yet, one voice, an old woman with milky eyes and a grudge against everything fermented, insists that the breath is the problem. The spirits, she says, don't want our breath. They never did. It's us who need the spirits, not the other way around. This does not go over well, because for generations breath was the link. Breath was how you fed the unseen, how you invited them in. To say it's the problem is like saying soup should be dry. Still, the fear spreads faster than the fever. Villagers begin making cakes in silence, shaping them with sticks, with spoons, with hands wrapped in cloth. Anything but lips, anything but breath. And for a time, it works. No new fevers, no new whispers, just dull, lifeless cakes that look like they were formed by bureaucracy. But the absence of illness doesn't comfort people, it unsettles them. Because what is a rice cake, if not a little lump of intimacy? What is a harvest rite without the human part? Without the breath? Soon, a new faction arises, secretive, desperate. They believe the lack of breath has offended the spirits even more, that the silence is not safety, it's abandonment. So they meet at dawn, quietly, in the rice paddies still wet from moonlight. They bring dough wrapped in cloth and they shape it the old way, with breath, with thumbprints, with songs sung under their breath, just above a whisper, just below heresy. They steam the cakes, they eat them together, and they do not fall ill, or at least not all of them. You see one of them now, a girl, perhaps 15. She breathes into her dough, then presses it gently. Her hands are trembling, but her exhale is steady. She's singing something, a lullaby about a fox who forgets its name. Behind her, an old man watches, not to stop her, just to remember. This is the split. The moment when the village stops being one village and becomes two beliefs living uneasily next to each other. The silent cakes, sanitized, shapeless, protected, and the whispered ones shaped with risk and ritual. Of course, the Empire notices. They send an inspector. His report, now tucked away in a forgotten archive, describes the village as divided by dough. He recommends standardization of rituals and immediate confiscation of breath-formed food. It's unclear if anyone followed through. But the cakes? They continued. Some in homes, quietly steamed at night, given to children with stories like, "Don't eat too fast or you'll forget who breathed on it." Some buried under trees, offered with hope and just a hint of rebellion. And here's the strange twist. Centuries later, a sample of earth from that village taken from under an old camphor tree revealed trace amounts of a rare mould, only found on long-fermented glutinous rice. No other village in the area had it, just that one. So maybe the old breath lingered. Maybe something stayed. Something warm. Something human. The historians, of course, are divided. Some argue this is proof of continued ritual practice despite official bans. Others say it's just environmental coincidence. But the villagers, they never wrote it down. They just told their children, and their children's children, make it with breath. Or don't make it at all. And you, watching the girl finish her cake soft, imperfect, undeniably alive, realize that breath isn't just tradition. It's defiance. It's memory. It's the part of the ritual that says, this cake came from a person, not a procedure. She places her cake into the steaming basket. The lid closes. The steam rises. And somewhere beyond the mist, the fever fades. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it never did. Maybe the whole thing was never about rice or sickness or spirits. Maybe it was just about how afraid people become when they lose control of the invisible. You exhale slowly, and you hope quietly that someone, someday, will shape a cake with your breath in mind. By now, you're used to arriving in strange places, but this one is different. You're in a valley, quiet, almost suspiciously quiet. The sun is just beginning to rise, bleeding gold into mist that clings to the hills like a shawl someone forgot to fold. The air feels thick, not with moisture, but with something older, like a memory that's been sitting too long in a box no one dared open. You've stumbled into a village you were never meant to find, not because it's secret, everyone nearby knows of it, but because it sings to its rice. Yes, that's not a metaphor. They literally sing to their rice cakes. You're here for a festival, the Rite of the Dawn steam, performed only once a year. There are no written records, no scrolls, no plaques, just song, passed down in fragments, never the same twice. The villagers are gathering dressed in a rough-spun linen dyed the colour of old tea. Their feet are bare, their faces tired in that way that suggests faith, not fatigue. At the centre of the clearing, a wooden platform, a steaming pot, and a large cloth bundle of glutinous rice dough waiting for breath. But not yet. First, the song. It begins with one voice, a child's, thin, wobbly, probably off-key. Then another joins, a woman, then an old man. Soon the whole village is humming this slow, circling melody. It's not beautiful, not in the way court songs are, but it's haunting. It loops, it bends, it climbs just high enough to ache, then falls again into something soft. And while they sing, they shape the cakes, not with tools, not even with hands, but with breath and rhythm. Each person takes a small lump of dough in their palms, closes their eyes, and exhales on the beat, one breath per line, one press per chorus. The result? A village full of cakes shaped not by individuals, but by a shared rhythm. The song leaves marks. You can see it. The cakes are uneven but consistent, like waves shaped by the same tide. You wonder what it feels like to make food that remembers a tune. Then, just as the song reaches a high, impossible note, the kind only grandmothers can hit, a silence falls. The cakes are placed into steamers, the lids close, no one speaks. You feel a lump rise in your throat, not from sadness, from reverence, from watching something so strange and tender it refuses to explain itself. Later, as the cakes cool, an elder speaks, not to you, to a group of teenagers who clearly don't want to be there. "Why do we sing?" she asks. They shrug. "Because our grandparents did," one says. She nods. "But do you know why they did?" They say nothing. She smiles with all the sharpness of someone who remembers being young and unimpressed. They believed the dough had ears, a few snickers. She doesn't mind. They believed that breath alone was not enough, that intention mattered, that if you exhaled while thinking of fear, the cake would come out bitter, but if you breathed while singing... She picks up a cake, presses her thumb into its side. It remembered the melody, it softened. The teenagers still look unconvinced, but one of them hums the tune under their breath. The elder pretends not to notice. Here's where it gets weird if it isn't weird already. An old tale from this village claims that one year, during a drought, the song was forgotten. No one could remember the middle verse. The cakes were made in silence. That season nothing grew, not even moss. A goat drowned in dry air. Was it coincidence? Probably. But from then on, the song was written, not on paper, but into the cakes themselves. Yes, each verse corresponds to a shaping technique. A long breath for the opening, a short burst for the turning, a thumb press for the final note. It's not just music, it's instruction. A rice cake recipe in lullaby form. No one outside the valley has ever successfully replicated it. A team of anthropologists once tried. They brought microphones, translators, even a musicologist who claimed perfect pitch. The villagers were polite, fed them, sang a fake version of the song, sent them home with cakes that tasted like disappointment. The real tune, they kept that for themselves. Because here's the thing about breath. It's personal. And when you wrap breath in music, it becomes something sacred, something unshareable. You pick up one of the finished cakes now. It's still warm, soft, but dense. It smells faintly of rice, salt, and something else. Emotion, memory. You bite. And for a second, just a second, you think you hear the song again. Not with your ears, with your teeth, with your breath. The tune fills you like steam, then it's gone. Some historians dismiss this entire tradition as folklore. Others suggest the singing helped regulate breath control, ensuring even heat distribution. Still others call it emotional gastronomy, which is academic, for we have no idea. But it sounds poetic. But the villagers don't argue, they just keep singing. One cake at a time, one breath per line, one song passed down like a river that remembers every stone it touches. And you sit there, cake in hand, and realize maybe shaping rice with breath is one thing, but shaping it with breath and song? That's a lullaby for the ancestors. That's a memory you can eat. That's history that hums when no one's listening. You exhale soft and slow. The note trembles, the cake listens, and the valley keeps its secrets. You awaken, not in your bed, but in a room that smells like tea leaves, flour, and ambition. The steam is sharper now, more intentional. The casual, half-forgotten breath rituals of valleys and night markets have given way to refinement, to formality, to the type of artistry that demands a clean apron, and the quiet judgment of strangers who think they know better. Welcome to the Song Dynasty. This is not a village. It's a tea house. Elegant, precise, mildly judgmental. You're standing in the back room of a place that's technically about tea, but is actually about politics, poetry, and gossip disguised as philosophy. The ear is uncertain, but the air is certain, humid with confidence and ginger. In front of you is a man with one eyebrow raised so high it should qualify as a weapon. He's a baker. but not the kind that smells like wood smoke and kindness. No, he's the kind who adjusts his sleeves before making a metaphor. He's furious. You see, his rival across the street, a woman named Chin with the nerve to smile while working, has just unveiled a new rice cake. One shaped, allegedly, with breath and infused with plum blossom essence. He's disgusted. Not by the cake, he ate 3, by the audacity. This isn't baking, he sneers to the room full of teacups and trapped students. It's sorcery. You listen as the debate begins, again. It's always the same. One camp insists that breath-shaped cakes are primitive superstition, a relic of pre-imperial foolishness. The other insists they are art, emotional, sensory, personal. One man stands up, very drunk on both wine and opinions, and declares, "Steam is the breath of the heavens. A rice cake shaped by breath is therefore divine." He is asked to leave. No one actually makes him. Here's what matters. While scholars debate, the bakers keep baking. They just do it in secret. Because here's a strange truth. Despite the growing refinement of the Song dynasty, its delicate scrolls and civil exams, there's still something raw lingering in the back kitchens. You step into one now. Not the tea house's main kitchen, no, too public. This one is behind a curtain, past a mop, near a door that groans with the knowledge of too many secrets. Inside, a young apprentice is shaping cakes, and she's breathing on them, not with ceremony, not with fear, but with purpose. She lifts each lump of rice dough, cups it in both hands, and exhales. Then she flattens it gently, presses a plum blossom petal into the centre, places it in a shallow wooden steamer. She does this again and again, never rushing. The breath doesn't sanctify. It softens. She whispers, once, to no one in particular. If you don't breathe on the dough, it doesn't remember what it's for. You believe her. Later she'll serve the cakes to a group of writers who will eat them between haikus about bridges and the inevitability of falling leaves. They won't ask how the cakes were made, but they will remember the taste, and maybe that's the only proof the ritual needs. Here's a lesser-known fact. During the Song dynasty, recipes weren't always written in measurements. Some included phrases like, "When the dough feels like your mother's hands," or "breathe into it until you no longer remember why you're angry." That last one appears in a letter from a monk to his former lover. The letter is unsigned. The cake, we assume, was delicious. There's even a regional folk tale about a rice cake so perfectly shaped by breath and sorrow that it caused the eater to weep uncontrollably for 2 hours. They say it tasted like unsent letters. The tale is most likely apocryphal. But if you've ever eaten something and suddenly remembered someone you hadn't thought about in 10 years, you understand the spirit of it. The tea house gossip continues outside. They're arguing about form now, texture. A poet says, "The cake should yield, but not surrender." Everyone nods, pretending that makes sense. But you're still watching The Apprentice. She's finished her batch. She closes the steamer, exhales one last time onto the lid, and rests her head against the warm wood. She's not religious. She's not even particularly sentimental. She's just tired. And breath, in the end, is what connects her to the cake. Not magic, not metaphor, just tired, warm air, and the hope that someone will taste what she put into it. That maybe, just maybe, they'll notice the quiet in the dough. Somewhere in a dusty university archive, a modern scholar once wrote, "Breath shaping, while no longer practiced, reveals a persistent longing for presence in absence food as trace, as evidence of the invisible cook." It's a beautiful idea. Wrong, of course, because breath shaping is still practiced, just not in front of critics, not in the spotlight, but in the back kitchens, in tea houses after closing, in the sigh between mixing and moulding. And now, as the steam rises and the apprentice begins to hum a tune too soft for sheet music, you realise the breath doesn't need belief to be real. It just needs a baker, and someone hungry enough to notice. You exhale. The steam curls around you. and you're full not from eating, but from knowing. Knowing that behind every perfect rice cake is a breath someone hoped wouldn't go to waste. You think you've gone everywhere rice can go, temples, tea houses, valleys of ghost-singing elders. You think foolishly that you've seen it all. And then a Mongol walks in. Not just any Mongol, a diplomat, a horseman, a man who's seen more borderlines than cities, and crucially a man who insists on breathing on every single food item presented to him before negotiations begin. You're in a tent now, the kind that feels like it was pitched 5 minutes ago and could be gone in 4. The walls flap gently in the dry wind, and somewhere outside someone is sharpening something. The air is a strange mix of salt, milk, and firewood, and in front of you, a plate of rice cakes, small, sticky, steamed hours ago by a host delegation who thought they'd impress the Mongol envoy with traditional northern hospitality. He's unimpressed, because the cakes weren't shaped by breath. "Who made these?" he asks, voice like cracked leather. No one answers. "They are dead," he says. "These cakes are not alive." A young attendant whispers that they were shaped with a brass mould. The Mongol grimaces like he's just smelled a lie. Then without warning he picks up a cake, exhales deeply onto it and places it back on the plate. You think he's finished. But no. He proceeds to breathe on every single one. 7 cakes. 7 deliberate exhales, each one louder and wetter than necessary. Each one performed with a kind of theatrical defiance that says, "I don't trust your intentions unless I've fogged them up first." Then he gestures for the rest of the delegation to eat. No one moves. He shrugs, picks up a cake, and eats it himself. "Better," he says, with a mouthful of sticky starch. You look at the others. They eat. No one dies. This is diplomacy, Mongol style. Here's the curious part. This wasn't a one-time incident. It was a pattern. In accounts written by courtiers across China, Persia, and even as far west as the Byzantine embassies, there are mentions of Mongol envoys who insisted on breathing on food before talks. Sometimes it was subtle, a little puff before sipping tea, a soft hum before touching bread. Sometimes it was less subtle. One record simply reads, "He exhaled upon the duck," repeatedly. Historians are divided. Some believe it was a test for poison. After all, breath could disturb powders or mark surfaces to track changes in colour. Practical. Clinical. Others think it was spiritual. That to the Mongols, breath was proof of intent, a way to connect with food before accepting its offering. Still others say it was just dramatic flair. But a few quiet, fringe voices suggest that the Mongols absorbed the idea from somewhere else, that they didn't invent breath blessing, but adopted it from the rice cults of the south, twisted it into something performative, diplomatic, intimidating. There's even a rumour about Kublai Khan himself, that before major feasts he would choose one dish always at random and breathe on it 3 times before anyone else could eat. Not for luck, not for flavour, just to remind everyone whose breath controlled the table. Now back to the tent. You're still watching the envoy eat his steamed rice cake, which now looks faintly soggy from his attention. He seems content. The conversation begins. The trade route is negotiated. No one gets stabbed. A success. Later, the host delegation begins preparing cakes for the next round of meetings. You hear one chef mutter, "Maybe if we breathe on them first, he won't huff on everything again." The others nod. And so, just like that, the ritual returns. But not for spirits, not for ancestors, for diplomacy. Breath, once a symbol of connection to gods and ghosts, is now a negotiation tactic, a preemptive offering, a weird kind of hospitality, halfway between superstition and etiquette, like passing the salt in the shape of a threat. You walk through other tents now. Some have picked up the habit, some make fun of it. But more and more, rice cakes begin appearing with slight indentations, finger-shaped, lip-warmed, steam-softened. The form remains. The meaning shifts. But doesn't it always? This is the story of breath, not as dogma, but as drift. It follows whoever carries it, adapts, evolves, turns sacred, then silly, then sacred again. And you, watching a Mongol exhale on starch with the solemnity of a priest, realize something uncomfortable and profound. He's not mocking the ritual. He believes in it, just differently. Breath here isn't reverence. It's power. It's permission. It's saying, this is mine now. I've left a trace. And if it kills me, at least I die knowing it knew I was here. You exhale, not out of reverence, but to mark the space, to say, I witnessed this. And somewhere beyond the dry flapping of canvas and the gentle hiss of steam rising from another fresh batch, you hear a story reshaping itself. Same dough, new intention, and a breath, still lingering, still warm. The tent folds away like an old secret and the step shrinks behind you. Now you are underground. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally underground. You're in a cellar, lit by oil lamps and surrounded by stone. It smells like damp wood, aging vinegar, and quiet defiance. Welcome to the Ming Dynasty. Above ground, everything is order. Silk-robed officials reciting the rituals of state, calendars made precise, cakes measured by weight, not wish. The breath-shaped traditions, outlawed, declared frivolous, inappropriate, and according to one edict, uncomfortably moist. But down here the cakes still breathe. Let's set the scene. The Empress had a dream, a strange one. A cake, rising with steam, spoke to her, not with words, but with breath. It tasted of her childhood, of wet clay and summer sweat. When she awoke, she issued a ban. No food was to be shaped with human breath. It was undignified, unsanitary, un-Ming. And so, across the empire, the breath cakes disappeared. Publicly. But secretly, something else began. Societies. Not armed rebellions, not cults. Something much more dangerous in a dynasty obsessed with control. Sentimental bakers. They gathered at night, in basements and hidden courtyards, to perform what they called the last exhale. A ritual that honoured the breath, not as superstition, but as identity. Each baker would shape a rice cake in silence, then pass it to another, who would breathe onto it and press it gently just once with their thumb or lips or forehead. They called it the stranger's mark, a symbolic gesture, the idea that a cake shaped by someone else's breath could carry a new kind of connection, one not born of lineage but of community. It was deliciously illegal. In one forgotten city, now a district swallowed by newer cities, a hidden bakery passed down an oral recipe that began like this. Begin with rice soaked in regret. Steam until the memory softens. Shape it with a breath that is not your own. That last part puzzled food historians for decades, until they found the ledger. It wasn't really a ledger. It was a notebook wrapped in rice paper, covered in smudged characters and grease. Inside, records of every last exhale gathering from a period spanning nearly 20 years. Names were redacted, but the notes are emotional. One entry reads, "She cried on the dough." No one said anything. The cake came out sweeter than usual. Another says, "A man brought rice from his dead wife's fields. No one breathed on his cakes. He asked us not to. We understood." The ledger ends abruptly in the winter of 1642. The last line, "Tonight we breathe quickly. There are footsteps above. They were likely discovered. The shop was boarded up. The baker, a widow with a fondness for fermented plum wine, vanished from all records. And yet, 50 years later, a traveller from Fujian described receiving a strange cake from a street vendor during the spring festival. It was small, perfectly shaped, but with a faint indentation in the middle lip-shaped, he said. Like a kiss or a warning. He asked where it came from. The vendor shrugged. It was shaped by someone who didn't want to be forgotten, she said. That's all she said. This is what the Ming forgot. You can outlaw breath, but you can't outlaw longing. You can't erase the part of people that wants to leave a mark, even a soft, barely visible one in a lump of rice. You can suppress breath-shaping ceremonies, but you can't stop someone from leaning over a pot of dough and whispering a name they're not supposed to say out loud. And you, standing in that damp underground kitchen, watching a boy press his nose into a rice cake like he's hoping it will remember his grandmother, realize this isn't just food, it's record-keeping, of the invisible kind. And breath is the ink. Later, when the cakes are steamed and the room fills with warmth and quiet laughter, someone wraps one in cloth and hands it to a stranger passing through. No name. No explanation. Just keep it warm. You exhale, not because you're tired, though you are, but because the room is full of memory and you don't want to forget yours. Maybe you'll carry this cake. Maybe you'll give it to someone else. Maybe you'll eat it. Either way, someone else's breath is already in it, and that's not gross. That's connection. You surface from the Ming cellar like someone coming up from a long, dream-damp, startled, unsure whether what you saw was real or just a side effect of rice starch inhalation. But now everything smells different. There's salt in the air, a breeze from the sea, and bells, not chimes, of courtly elegance, but little wooden clappers tied to shrines where no one speaks unless they mean it. You're in Japan now, somewhere quiet, the edges of a village, a place where the air tastes like cedar and the horizon is always watched by something older than the people who live here. You're here for a different kind of rice cake. It's called mochi. And yes, you've heard the word before. You've probably seen it in convenience stores, stuffed with red bean or ice cream or trend fatigue. But this mochi, this is something else. It's part of a Shinto harvest rite, and it too is shaped with breath. The ceremony begins at dawn. Always. The gods apparently prefer sunlight in their rice, and reluctance in their worshippers. You sit beside an old priest in layered robes that look like they've been folded the same way for 600 years. He doesn't speak much, but he nods toward the courtyard where the rice has already been soaked overnight, drained and steamed. Now comes the pounding. You know the scene. 2 men with mallets, one with a rhythm like thunder, the other barehanded, fearless, reaching into the paste between strikes, flipping it over with fingers that somehow never get smashed. It's beautiful, terrifying, also weirdly intimate. Because the mochi isn't just pounded into submission, it's coaxed. The pounding gives it stretch, elasticity, but it's the breath that gives it presence. Between rounds, the priest leans over the steaming mound, presses his face close and exhales. Gently, reverently, his breath disappears into the glutinous mass like it's being absorbed. No words, just breathe. He does this 3 times, then passes the dough to a younger assistant who repeats the process. This happens again and again, until every member of the ritual circle has breathed onto the mochi at least once. Why? Because they believe the breath contains the soul of the household. The mochi, once shaped and offered, becomes a vessel for that spirit, not permanently, just for a season, just until the next rice sprouts, and they don't joke about this. In one family it's said the grandmother's breath lingered in a New Year's mochi for weeks. The dog wouldn't go near it, the wind avoided it. Someone knocked it over, and it rolled into the shrine on its own, quietly. Coincidence, surely, but no one questions it. Shinto isn't about belief the way people think. It's about presence. It's about doing things properly, even if you don't remember why, even if you never asked in the first place. And so the mochi is shaped, not by moulds, not with tools, but with hands and breath and silence. Each cake is placed on a sheet of paper folded into a shape resembling the roof of a house. It's a way of saying, this is shelter, this is memory, this is us, in dough. There's a rule unspoken, but strict. No one breathes on mochi unless they belong. Not belong legally, not even socially, spiritually. If your breath doesn't carry the voice of the land under your feet, it's better you stay quiet. One outsider once broke this rule. A merchant from the mainland, eager to impress, leaned in and exhaled onto the dough without being asked. The mochi hardened overnight, cracked in the sun. No one said anything, but the merchant never came back. To this day, some shrines have a special dish called the breathless cake offered when someone in the family dies suddenly, before their spirit could be captured. It's made the same way, but no one breathes on it. It's left plain, empty. They say the gods eat it last. Some anthropologists call this breath-right domestic animism. Others call it hygiene theatre with cultural flourish. But one researcher, after spending a full year in the region, wrote this: "The breath-shaping of mochi is not prayer, it is punctuation. The pause between growing and eating. The sigh that makes the dough remember who you were, even when you don't, and you believe it. Because now, as the cakes cool and the offerings are placed on the family altar, something happens. The wind changes, just slightly. A curl of incense swirls upward, then folds back down toward the mochi, as if the air itself is breathing in. You look at the priest. He smiles. Someone remembered. No one says who. They don't need to. The breath is enough. You sit with that thought as the ceremony ends and the altar glows with the quiet pride of things done properly, things done without spectacle. Because here, breath isn't magic, it's responsibility, a sign that you cared enough to give a piece of yourself, even if it was invisible. You exhale. The mochi does not reply. But it listens. Of course it listens. You're still in Japan, but now the robes are heavier, and the air tastes like incense and suspicion. The room is unfamiliar, though it pretends not to be. Candles flicker. A statue of Mary stares blankly across a lacquered floor, and a man in a black robe is fanning himself far too slowly to be comfortable. You're not in a shrine anymore. You're in a mission house. It's the early 1600s, and the Jesuits have arrived, with crosses, with scrolls, and somehow with opinions on rice cakes. This is where it gets strange. Stranger than usual. You're watching a missionary Father Matteo, although everyone just calls him the Tall, one standing before a table of offerings. On it sits a single mochi, still warm from the steamer, shaped lovingly by an elderly woman who thought it might be polite to welcome the foreign priest with a traditional treat. He's staring at it, like it might bite him. His assistant leans in and whispers, "It was shaped with breath. It's a local custom." Father Matteo steps back. He crosses himself. Then, to the horror of no one and the confusion of everyone, he begins to exorcise the mochi. He sprinkles it with holy water. He chants in Latin. At one point, he raises it toward heaven and mutters, "Liberate us from starch-based deceit. No one knows what to say." The old woman bows anyway, not because she agrees, but because she's polite. The mochi sits, soggy now, vaguely offended. Let's pause for a second. Why did this happen? Because breath, according to some early missionaries, was too close to soul, and shaping food with breath, that sounded uncomfortably like witchcraft, or idolatry, or possibly breakfast. They didn't understand, but they felt something, and that terrified them. You see, the Jesuits came with rules, hierarchies, clear boundaries between sacred and profane. But mochi didn't follow rules. It was soft. It was quiet. It listened to breath and never told you what it had heard. In some regions, villagers said mochi could carry voices across realms, that if you shaped one in grief and left it by a shrine, the person you'd lost would come to you in a dream and ask, "Why didn't you sweeten it?" To the missionaries, this wasn't food. It was a message, and they didn't like the language. Of course, not all were so severe. One Jesuit, recorded anonymously in a marginal note in a catechism manuscript, wrote, "The rice cakes do not speak, but I sometimes think they remember. When the villagers breathe on them, it's not paganism, it's mourning, or mercy, or something no Latin word can hold." He was reassigned shortly after, but his note survives. Still, tensions rose. In some villages, the breath-shaping ritual was hidden. Bakers performed it at night. Cakes were left unshaped, only to be secretly breathed upon before being steamed. In one case, a rice farmer reportedly shaped his cakes behind a screen, then lied and said they had been formed by wind alone. That defence was met with confusion and a surprisingly philosophical argument about whether wind counts as divine intent. Historians remain divided. Meanwhile, something curious happened. The villagers began shaping 2 sets of mochi. One for the missionaries, perfectly round, untouched, flavourless, hygienic, and one for themselves shaped with breath, softened with songs, and sometimes marked with a single fingernail scratch to indicate who had whispered into the dough. They did not mix them up, except once. A low-ranking church official accidentally ate a spirit cake and reportedly wept for 2 hours. He later claimed it reminded him of his mother, though he hadn't thought of her in 15 years. Coincidence? Maybe. But word spread. Soon, even some foreign priests began quietly accepting breath-shaped cakes. Not publicly, not officially, but in small moments, in kitchens, at funerals, during storms, because even dogma has limits. Even missionaries get homesick, and sometimes a warm cake shaped with someone else's breath feels like forgiveness, even if you're not sure what for. You're watching one now. A priest new, uncertain, holds a cake in both hands. It's plain, still steaming. The baker smiles, offers no explanation. He inhales, he exhales, he takes a bite. He does not cross himself, he does not cry. But he closes his eyes, just for a second. Just long enough for the baker to know that the ritual was received. And maybe that's all it was ever meant to be. A quiet exchange. A breath for a moment. A warmth for a wound. The room smells of cedar again. The candles flicker, not from wind, but from something smaller. Something like relief. You exhale. The cake listens. It always has. Even when we didn't. You drift westward now, carried on a breeze too polite to call itself colonial. The air grows heavier thick with language you recognise, but twisted at the corners. The rice smells different here. Drier. Nervous. You're in a port city somewhere in Southeast Asia in the mid-1600s. The Dutch are here now, and they've brought order. At least their version of it. You stand at the edge of a courtyard. Not quite European, not quite native. The trees are local, the fences are imported. And in the centre, beneath the shade of an untrustworthy mango tree, a man is watching a rice cake float. Yes, float. It's not magic. It's engineering. The man, clearly Dutch, clearly confused, is writing furiously in a leather-bound journal. He doesn't look like someone who understands food. He looks like someone who measures things that don't want to be measured. You look closer. The cake is sitting in a shallow bowl of water, glutinous, uncooked, and somehow it's not sinking. This is not supposed to happen. Rice cakes, especially those shaped with breath, are denser than regret. They sink. They cling to steam. They do not hover. But this one floats. He turns to his assistant and says, "This one was shaped with breath. Yes." The assistant, a local boy barely old enough to be bored, shrugs, so they say. The Dutchman frowns. He dips a second cake in. It sinks. He takes a third, breath-shaped. Floats. He writes in all caps. Of course, no one believes him. When his journal is later reviewed by the East India Company, a note is added. Possibly heat distortion. Possibly native trickery. Unreliable. But the villagers know the truth. At least their truth. You follow the assistant home. His grandmother's in the kitchen, her hands in a bowl of rice flour, her breath coming slow and steady. She doesn't speak. She just shapes. Exhales. Folds, exhales again. The cakes she makes, they don't float, but one does not sink. It hovers for just a moment before slipping beneath the water, like it hesitated, like it was deciding whether to accept gravity. The boy asks, Why do some float? She replies, they don't float. They remember the surface longer. He doesn't understand, neither do you. But you both remember the phrase, and years later, when he grows up and becomes a cook for the Dutch outpost, he will still shape his cakes with breath, quietly, illegally, sentimentally. He'll even teach one of the Dutch wives how to do it. She'll laugh, thinking it a charming local superstition. But when she shapes her first cake with breath, she will dream of her sister for the first time in 20 years. Coincidence? The baker shrugs. I told you, he says. It remembers. Here's where it gets stranger. In the 18th century, a researcher from the Batavian Society of Arts and Sciences publishes a small essay called On the Floating Cakes of Java, describing breath as an invisible agent with possible caloric influence on starch behaviour. It's mocked by the scientific community for being unprofessional, mystical, and improperly footnoted. Still, people read it. A handful of European travellers begin requesting breath-shaped cakes in local markets. Vendors pretend not to hear. But sometimes, just sometimes, if they see you're listening, truly listening, they'll pass you one wrapped in banana leaf. No extra charge, no explanation. Just a wink, a nod, and a story that never quite gets told the same way twice. Even now, in some parts of Indonesia, Malaysia and Vietnam, old vendors make a particular kind of cake for funerals. Software sticky, shaped only by women past a certain age, shaped with breath. And they say, if the cake floats in the rainwater bowl beside the altar, the soul of the departed has safely crossed over. If it sinks immediately, someone has forgotten something. No one says what, but everyone checks. And you, still following the trail of this one floating cake from centuries ago, start to see the shape of something bigger. It's not about levitation. It's not about superstition. It's about the idea that breath leaves a trace. That exhaling into something, even something as humble as a rice cake, might carry more weight or less weight than anyone understands. Maybe the floating isn't physics. Maybe it's recognition. The cake knows it was shaped with care, with memory, with something that doesn't want to sink just yet. You stand beside the mango tree again. The bowl is empty now, but the water remembers, and so do you. You exhale, and the surface ripples just a little, just enough. The wind shifts, and with it, the starch hardens. You're not in a kitchen anymore, not in a shrine, not a cellar, not even in a village. You're in a factory now. The 20th century has arrived, and it didn't bring breath with it. It brought metal. Rows of machines hum with the quiet threat of efficiency. Pipes coil like intestines. Steam hisses, not like memory, but like pressure being released before it breaks something. This is industrial rice cake production. Clean, controlled, breathless. You're in Korea now, somewhere on the outskirts of Seoul, in a rice cake factory built during wartime to feed people faster than grief could catch them. It's 1951. The war has already cut deep. Cities are smoke and craters. Families are scattered. People are tired in that permanent way that sleep doesn't fix. And the rice cakes? Well, they still need to be made. Because even amid bombings and ration lines, rituals refuse to die. But now they're being mass-produced. You watch as white cylinders of teok slide down a conveyor belt, mechanically perfect, each identical to the last, uniform, efficient, lifeless. A woman in an apron stands by the line, boxing the cakes. She doesn't look at them. She doesn't need to. Her hands move faster than memory, but her eyes keep drifting to the old steamer in the back, the one no one uses anymore. It still sits there, heavy, wooden, cracked from heat and habit. It smells like the past, and maybe a little like her mother's breath. At lunch, she sneaks away, just for a minute. She opens the lid of the old steamer. Inside, it's empty, but she exhales into it anyway, just once, like she used to when she was small. when the war hadn't come yet, when breath still meant something. A co-worker sees her, says nothing. The next day, someone leaves a small lump of raw dough in the steamer. No note, no explanation. By the end of the week, the factory's unofficial ritual has begun. At 4:17 p.m, every day, just after the second machine hiss, someone places a bit of dough in the steamer and someone else breathes on it. No one talks about it. They just do it, quietly, carefully, as if hoping the machines won't notice. Here's where it gets beautifully stupid. One day, a manager inspects the line and asks, "What's that wooden thing doing back there?" A worker shrugs. "Storage." He opens the lid, sees the dough. "It's not safe," he mutters. He reaches to throw it out, but before he can, another worker stops him. "She breathes on it," she says. He stares. "Why?" "She lost a son." Pause. "During the train evacuation. He used to help her steam cakes." Another pause. The manager closes the lid, walks away. No one speaks of it again. Years later, when the factory modernizes, the old steamer is finally removed, but not thrown out. It's placed in the company's historical display, labelled "Early Equipment, Unknown Ritual Use." But the workers know. Some of them still breathe into their palms before touching the dough. Just a quick puff, a private memory, not superstition, not grief, just inclusion. A way of saying, you're still here, even if you're not. Historians, of course, are baffled by this. Factory records from the time show increased production accuracy and a sudden drop in reported mechanical failure during the period of the unofficial ritual. Coincidence? Always. But coincidence gets a little shaky when you realise that other ice cake factories, ones that ignored tradition completely, had higher rates of equipment failure, employee turnover, and cakes described as technically perfect, emotionally void. That's a real quote. From a factory foreman. In a company memo, someone even tried to replicate the old ritual in a lab. Measured moisture content, starch gelatinization, even microbial changes in breath-shaped dough. The results? Inconclusive, but noticeably different. Which is just science speak for something happened, but we don't know how to explain it without losing tenure. And you, standing here in the middle of machines that don't breathe, listening to workers who still do, start to realise something vital. The breath wasn't always spiritual. Sometimes it was just human. A way to say, I touched this. I was here. I existed for a moment in the life of something soft. Because when you lose people, you still want to shape something. Even if it's rice, even if it's quiet, even if no one but you knows why you keep doing it. You exhale now, slowly, and the air doesn't answer, but it feels thicker, as if filled with 100 forgotten sighs, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. By now, you've followed breath through dynasties, deserts, war zones, and temples. You've watched it vanish under edicts, resurface in cellars, hum in lullabies, and float above water bowls like it wasn't finished being remembered. And just when you think it's over, when the machines have silenced it, when the rituals have fossilized, someone breathes again. Not to preserve tradition, but to say goodbye. Welcome to Jeonju, a small city, a quiet one, famous for bibimbap, hanok rooftops, and grandmothers who whisper things to trees when they think no one is listening. You're in the back room of a modest house with sliding doors and a creaky rice cooker older than the electric grid. The wallpaper curls at the corners. The window fogs up even when it isn't cold. It smells like seaweed, sesame oil, and the end of something. Because tonight, a woman is making her last rice cake. She's dying. Not immediately, but soon enough that the family has started calling every meal the last of something. The last pot of soup, the last walk to the market, and now the last tteok. They gather around her kitchen like it's a shrine. No one says much. Her daughter measures the rice. Her grandson stirs the water, but it's the grandmother bone thin, wrapped in 2 sweaters, eyes like old smoke who does the shaping, She doesn't speak. She just breathes, once into her hands, once onto the dough, and once very gently onto the face of her granddaughter, who holds the steamer like it contains the future. She shapes the rice cake with fingers that once held children, pulled weeds, and folded letters she never sent. She presses her thumb into the dough, not hard, not ceremonially, just enough. Then she breathes again, not for the cake, for herself, as if to remind her body that it's still here. The room is silent, the steam rises, and someone not sure who starts to cry. Later, they will say that the cake tasted like her, that it wasn't sweet, wasn't chewy, wasn't even that good, but it was hers, and that made it sacred. One cousin claims it made their chest ache, like they'd swallowed a memory. Another says they had dreams of the grandmother's garden, though they hadn't visited in years. No one argues, because you don't argue with the dead when they're still warm. And then something stranger happens. A researcher anthropologist, polite, curious, shows up a month later. He's collecting oral histories about ritual food practices. The family invites him in. They tell him the story. He smiles, says, "That's beautiful," then asks, "But did the breath really matter?" And the granddaughter, who now makes the rice cakes, answers, "It did to us," which is the only answer that ever matters. The researcher nods. He writes it down. He leaves. But he doesn't forget. 2 years later, in Seoul, he's working in a food lab. They're running tests on traditional starch fermentation. Nothing mystical. Just enzymes, temperature, moisture content. Out of curiosity, he repeats the old ritual. Same rice, same preparation. One sample shaped with tools, the other breathed on. He measures everything. Again and again. No difference. Until he tastes them. The breath-shaped one, it lingers. Not in flavour, in feeling. He doesn't write that in his report, but he remembers. And sometimes, when no one's around, he breathes onto the dough before sealing the sample, just in case. And so, the grandmother's breath lives on. Not in a ghost story, not in folklore, but in the dough of her descendants, in the kitchens of people who miss her, in the invisible presence of a woman who believed in breath, not because it was spiritual, but because it was hers to give. And you, watching this quiet transfer of memory through starch and silence, finally understand what all of this has been about. The breath isn't magic. It's not a symbol. It's not even about the cake. It's about the act of giving something you can't take back. Something soft, intimate, unrecordable. Breath is the only ingredient we never write down, and yet it's the one we always notice when it's missing. You exhale, the steam curls gently, and somewhere in a warm kitchen someone shapes dough with a little extra care, not knowing why, just knowing they should. At this point, the story should be over. Breath-shaped cakes have been moulded by grandmothers, exorcised by Jesuits, floated by Dutchmen, smuggled under empresses' noses, and sung into existence by entire villages. But the story keeps breathing. Because memory doesn't end when the tradition does. And so, in a lab somewhere in modern-day Seoul, surrounded by microscopes and fluorescent lighting that flickers like it's also tired, someone tries to prove it. Not faith, not folklore, science. Her name is Dr. Kim. She does not believe in spirits. She drinks 3 espressos a day, labels her jars in 2 languages, and once referred to ancestor worship as culturally significant but chemically irrelevant. So naturally, she's the perfect person to test the idea that human breath might affect glutinous rice starch structure. It starts with a grant, a university looking for PR-friendly research. Ethnographic food chemistry, they call it. And so she gathers her team technicians, interns, and one ancient visiting scholar who insists on calling mochi ghost starch. They prepare 3 batches of glutinous rice dough. Batch A is shaped by machine, batch B is shaped by hand, batch C is shaped with hand, and breath. Soft exhale, No incantations, just a puff of warm air before moulding. They steam them the same way, same temperature, same duration, same boring stainless steel steamer. Then they test viscosity, elasticity, moisture retention, flavour absorption, microbial profiles. The results? Inconclusive. No major difference in texture. No statistically significant flavour deviation. But here's the thing. Everyone on the team agrees batch C just feels different. Softer, not physically, emotionally. One intern says it tastes calmer. Another says, it reminded me of my aunt, but I've never made mochi with her. The visiting scholar cries, but he does that often. Dr. Kim frowns. She doesn't publish the emotional data. Of course not. Instead, she writes, further testing required. Potential psychosomatic variables introduced via tactile breath interaction. No measurable changes in starch structure detected. Privately, she adds a note to her lab journal. Try again, but this time with someone you miss. Later that week, she goes home. She finds her grandmother's old steamer in the back of a cabinet under a plastic rice paddle and a tangle of expired tea. She cleans it, soaks the rice, and exhales. Once, just once. No prayers, no expectations, just participation. And when she eats the cake, alone at her kitchen table, she doesn't cry. She doesn't see ghosts. But she does sit very, very still for 10 minutes, as if listening for something that doesn't speak in words. She brings the results back to the lab the next day, doesn't say a word, just labels the sample, batch D, home. Her colleagues know better than to ask. Meanwhile, word spreads, articles get written, bloggers try breath mochi challenges, foodies debate ethics. Is it okay to exhale on something someone else will eat? Someone uploads a video of their grandmother shaping teok with breath. It goes viral. The top comment reads, I didn't know I missed her until I saw this. A think piece follows, titled, The New Intimacy of Old Rituals. Someone else writes a snarky tweet. Can we not romanticize respiratory output during food prep? Fair. But still people try it. In kitchens across the world, someone exhales onto warm dough. Gently, awkwardly, curiously. Some laugh, some cry. Some do it once and never again. But some keep going. Because something about the act lingers. Because something in the breath changes the moment. Not the taste, not the science, the presence. You feel it too. As you watch these people shape cakes, not for gods or festivals or rituals they only half remember, but for someone. Sometimes for someone gone. Sometimes for someone still asleep in the next room. Sometimes for themselves, just to prove they still can. No altar, no ancestors, just a human. And some starch. And the knowledge that we still carry the oldest tool we've ever used. Our breath. You exhale now. Not because the story told you to, but because your body remembered first. And in the silence that follows, you finally understand the breath doesn't change the cake. It changes the maker. And now we come to you. You, sitting in the dark. Maybe your phone's dim screen is the only thing still glowing. Maybe your fan is humming. Maybe your blanket is bunched near your knees and your foot's fallen asleep, but you're too lazy to move it. You've heard every part of the story now, from the chewed rice of the Neolithic fires to the laboratories of soul, from mouldy altars to viral hashtags, from whispered wishes to exercised mochi, from war to lullabies to floating rice cakes nobody could explain without sounding like a poet or a liar. So let's ask the question one last time. Do rice cakes know they're part of something larger? Do they remember the breath that shaped them? The thumb that pressed into their centre? The name that was never spoken, but still slipped through an exhale, trembling. The answer isn't on any scroll. It's not on a data sheet. It's not even in a grandmother's recipe box tucked behind the dried anchovies and unopened soy packets from takeout orders she refuses to throw away. Number. The answer is quieter. It's in the moment you shape something with your hands, something small, something soft, something completely unnecessary to survival, and you breathe on it, not for flavour, not for structure, but because you can. Because your breath is the one thing no one can do for you. Your breath has no backup system, no delegation, no one else can loan you theirs, and maybe that's why we've spent centuries pressing it into food, because it's the closest thing we have to proof of life that isn't just a pulse, it's intention, it's presence, it's I was here, I made this, I loved something quietly, and maybe, just maybe, even now, in a world of factories and algorithms and snack food shaped like emojis, you still want to believe that somewhere in that soft, warm bite is the breath of someone who once thought of you. Even if they didn't know your name, even if they'd been gone a long, long time, you picture it now. A rice cake, still warm, sitting in your palm, shaped by someone you never met. Someone who lived before borders, before brands, before Instagram reels about how to make authentic tteok in 47 seconds. Someone who whispered into the dough and said in their own quiet way, "Here, I made this, I hope it helps." And maybe that's the real ritual, not the shape, not the steam, not even the rice, but the idea that somewhere, sometime, a stranger's breath entered the dough and waited for you. So now the story is circled back. It's not about them anymore. It's about you. You who stayed through all of this. You who listened. You who breathed. You don't need to shape a cake. You don't need to believe in spirits or ancestors or enzymes with emotional memory. You just need to breathe out and remember that you too are part of something soft, small, and larger than you will ever understand. Maybe you are the breath. Maybe you are the cake. Maybe you are both. You exhale. The room is still. The story is done. But your breath, still here, still warm, still waiting. And now, dear listener, everything slows. Let the last crumbs of history settle around you like dust in quiet sunlight. Let the steam fade. Let the rice cool. You've wandered through kitchens and kingdoms, heard the echoes of strangers who shaped dough with memory and breath, watched time loop through hands and mouths and ceremonies that no one quite agreed on, but everyone somehow knew how to perform. None of it required permission. None of it needed to be written down, because every act was small, quiet, and deeply human, like you. Maybe you're resting on your side now, or curled in that odd, lopsided way you always sleep. Maybe your hands near your chest, still, breathing slowly. You can stop thinking now. Let the breath you've carried through this story soften into something shapeless. There's nothing left to learn tonight. Only warmth, only rest, only the knowledge that people before you shaped something with breath and hope, and somehow it reached you. Without a name, without a map, just a soft, invisible trail of presence from then to now. You're safe. You're soft. You're already part of something larger. Let yourself sink. Let yourself stay. Let yourself breathe.